Hello, my name is Nancy Graham, and I'm coming to you today from Montgomery, Alabama, in the United States. And I'm going to be reading a paper on the value of singing what we call by heart. Songs have long been the means for people to create and celebrate their identity. It's a human thing, according to hymn writer John Bell. As any singer knows, the act of singing the song produces a spiritual connection with the surrounding situation, be it the open air, a classroom, or a house of worship. During this time of pandemic anxiety and confusion, singing has been effectively banned as a colossal conduit for infection. There's been much discussion, anger, and disbelief with the constraints placed upon this social and singular method of communicating. The body of this paper deals with this aspect of humanity and its agency. Though we are all inactive at the moment, none of the means for effective social connection to spirituality through singing have changed. The evolution and development of music making and its relationship to language and the metaphysical have puzzled and challenged researchers of all scientific disciplines. Darwin's observations on music making deal mostly with the sounds of a variety of species made during what humans would term highly emotional times, like danger, mating, or defending their young. He suggests that a deep principle of inherited associations enable musical tones to call up strong emotions of a long past age, however vague or indefinite. Darwin proposed that the evolution of singing and that of language were closely related. He thought that speech evolved from singing. Within the modern sciences, studies in music making have been numerous but hardly conclusive. In his book, A Million Years of Music, Gary Tomlinson states, musicking came about via capacities that enabled the formalization of proto-music, proto-language, and proto-discourse. The indicators in these prototypes are elusive, though presumably consistently present. Nailing down the entry of spirituality and religion into humanness is a slippery study. The British anthropologist Maurice Bloch offers that transcending sociality requires the ability to live largely in the imagination, and trying to explain religion is a misguided enterprise. What needs to be explained is the nature of human sociability, and then religion simply appears and is an aspect of the imaginative power that cannot stand alone. Stephen Brown of the Neurolab at McMaster University proposes that music and language evolved together, and that language became more important for exact communication, and music served to bond the unity of the group. Initially, singing in church services was a liturgical function engaged in by the priests, monks, and other religious. With the revolutionary disruption of the Reformation, the traditional liturgy changed drastically to include congregational alliance to the service through singing. Martin Luther proffered the concept of a communal, yet individual praising dialogue between the celebrant and singer, with original verses often set to familiar plainsong. Eric Routley says that when the reforming movement solidified in the 1600s, it was already clear that the congregational song was going to be permanently affected by the demand of the people for reasonably simple music and by the fading into the past of the lofty rhetorical style that had characterized the larger scale compositions of Luther's lifetime. In England, a century later, this marked the beginning of present-day hymnody. In keeping with the desire for a simpler style of singing, an echo style was incorporated, known by different names, and here will be called lining out. A leader, or precentor, sings the first line of a psalm, hymn, or spiritual song, and the congregation repeats it. This method continues through all of the verses, which leads to very long periods of singing. The singing, to the observer, or the uninterested, was doleful and pedantic, though containing an inclusive spirituality that lingers today. It was John Wesley in the 1700s who first publicly demanded that Christians attend to their spirituality by singing. In select hymns with tunes annexed, Wesley gives a strong indication of his feelings toward hymn singing and foretells the fervor of the camp meeting songs in the Second Great Awakening. At the beginning of his hymn book, Wesley lays out 7 directions for singing, most of which speak to releasing the spirituality from the human pitfall of vanity. The wording is colloquial, direct, and even humorous. This list is still in the opening pages of the official hymnal of the United Methodist Church. Time does not permit me to list them here, but Wesley's instructions are easily obtained in a browser search and well worth the trouble. In New England, the clergy effectively ruled the communities. In an effort to model hymns after the church music in Europe, the region established singing schools, a transient sphere of musicians that worked up and down the Atlantic coast and into the backwoods. The supporters of this prescribed method used a simple 4-note system of shaped note heads, the forerunner of what is later referred to as sacred harp or fa sol la singing. Though this practice continues worldwide, it was nearly snuffed out by the efforts of one many know as the father of music education. Lowell Mason was one of the most influential church musicians and teachers of the 19th century. His initial music education was obtained near Boston from the previously mentioned singing schools. Looking to the European musicians who had flooded American cities for support, Mason pronounced the revival tunes and spirituals as crude and lewd folk hymns that did not establish the correct tone for truly spiritual and devotional singing. He spent much time in England and continental Europe finding verification for his opinions. In 1837, he published a hymnal, The Sacred Harp or Eclectic Harmony. This featured hymns and anthems using shaped note heads, but with the European 7-pitch psalmization. In contrast to Wesley's mere 7 instructions, Mason includes 23 pages of technique to produce the desired and proper reverential product. Publishers immediately followed this volume with a round note edition. Large city churches rapidly approved and implemented Mason's instructions and European influences, casting aside the roughness of the American folk style. Concurrently, Mason introduced his methods to the public schools in Boston, and by the end of the 19th century, the rest of the country had followed suit. The fa sol la books and their defenders were pushed into the rural areas and the southern states. Mason's influence is still felt today in public schools and the choral music ministries of major denominations. His method is solid, but music education in the present culture does not have the strength and support that it enjoyed 100 or more years ago. However, it still uses the Mason blueprint. Global mobility, technological advancement, and lack of funds have all played their part in changing music appreciation into a passive amusement rather than an active creative art. In the last 10 years, a new term has hit music education circles, paperless singing. This teaching style is a contemporary term that combines the ancient and common music of the people, and the result is a spiritually driven and spiritually received form of music making. It's certainly not new, and in practice throughout the world, encouraging the same orality used for millennia in any folk culture. The rebirth of this method in the English-speaking communities can redirect attention toward the benefits of group singing, building a cohesive spiritual community where none existed. Paperless singing is often featured at 21st century music conferences and workshops. To the uninformed, this is an ambiguous term, begging clarification before enrolling. To the curious who just show up, they're often surprised that they enjoy this new singing style. The irony is obvious. After roughly 300 or 400 years of embellishment through technological advancements such as printed scores and digitalization, paperless singing is simply recognizing spirituality through the human voice. Clark Terry, the jazz trumpeter, said that successful musical communication is achieved through imitation, repetition, and assimilation. This is the credo of effective paperless singing. The challenge today lies in encouraging non-musicians to join in the song that has been the realm of reading musicians for so long. Current advocates of this approach are Alice Parker and John Bell. Another, Donald Schell, founder of Music That Makes Community, says this: people today still want to sing, even those, and maybe especially those, who call themselves non-singers. Non-singers hope something can replace their shame at what they can't do with a freedom and renewed desire to sing. Certain types of compositions are more suited for this teaching method, and some retooling of technique is necessary for the leader. Songs with simple melody, taught phrase by phrase, layered songs with 2 or more parts, rounds and canons, call and response and echo songs work well. This last type is the easiest to teach, as the leader sings a line and the congregation repeats it back. Actually, executing this approach can be a little daunting, as it's different from the traditional methods of directing or conducting. Like the others listed above, Shell has a list of tenets to help this. Prepare. Sing more, explain less. Set the appropriate pitch. Teach with more than your voice, using hand and face gestures. You are a facilitator, not a conductor. Your confidence is infectious. Song leading builds relationships. Share authority with the singing community, and keep singing. In the U.S. state of Tennessee, a diverse group of 30 to 100 people gather for worship and a meal every Thursday night. This practice has existed for nearly 20 years in a Midtown Memphis Presbyterian church. The irregularity of this service is that it is not composed of members of the host church, but primarily filled with the men, women, and children with unstable housing in Memphis. The leaders of the service are all volunteer laypersons, with an ordained minister who presides over the communion celebration offered every week. At the inception of this service, a traditional liturgy was employed with random hymns selected from the denominational hymnal, led by the accompanist at the piano or organ, with his or her back to the potential worshipers. The wordy texts and complex tunes defeated any urge to participate, and with no visible leadership, very few attendees even attempted to sing. The service was flat. Stereotypes of the homeless are difficult to surmount, even with well-meaning leadership. In this case, hymnals, organs, and formal liturgy are intimidating and overwhelming to these marginalized human beings, and the accompanying issues of hunger, addictions, and mental illness demand respectful attention from the song leaders in order to release the spirituality buried in their cognizance. Until about 4 years ago, the Thursday service functioned as a safe place to find relief from the cold in winter and from the brutal Memphis heat and humidity during the long summer. The congregants frequently left the service to get a good spot for the upcoming meal in another part of the building. Out of desperation, a change in liturgy and music presentation was suggested and cautiously instituted, using the sensitive words of liturgies from the Iona community, participatory readings, prayers, and lined out call and response and echo songs. Now, the musician stands in front of the worshipers and leads the songs in an unaccompanied face-to-face manner, using physical gestures and expressions to encourage a corporate In the US state of Tennessee, a diverse group of 30 to 100 people